Libya's Colonel Gaddafi was once a mad dog in American eyes. Now the US believes he's well and truly house-trained. As Condoleezza Rice makes her way there, what's changed for both countries and why? And who stands to make the most as the money pours in? This is Inside Story. I'm David Foster. No longer enemies, but not quite friends, was Gaddafi's description of his country's new relationship with the United States. Let them leave us alone, and we would leave them alone, he said. It all started to improve 5 years ago when Libya announced that it would be giving up its weapons of mass destruction. The same year, Libya accepted responsibility for the 1988 Lockerbie bombing and agreed to compensate the victims' relatives. In return, the US dropped or suspended many sanctions against Libya in 2004. In 2006, US removed Libya from a terrorism blacklist and restored full diplomatic ties with Tripoli. Now Condoleezza Rice is scheduled to visit the country in just a few hours following a deal signed on August the 14th between Libya and the United States to settle claims on both sides for bombings. The compensation deal also covering the 40 Libyans who were killed in 1986 by an American air raid on Libya. Well, Italy too is shaking hands diplomatically and financially with Libya. Last Saturday, the Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi signed a compensation deal worth billions of dollars. He apologised for any damage inflicted on Libya during the Italian colonial era there and agreed to pay the country $5 billion in compensation. Tripoli says that thousands of Libyans were killed and driven from their homes under Italian occupation. In exchange, Italy's hoping to win energy contracts in Libya and for Tripoli to tighten security measures and stem the flow of illegal immigrants. Joining us now from Washington, D.C., David Mack, scholar at the Middle East Institute, a former U.S. ambassador in Libya at the time of the revolution in the late 60s. And in Seattle, in Washington State, Dr. Ali Tahouni, a professor of economics and finance at the University of Washington and a man sentenced to death in absentia by the Gaddafi regime. Dr. Tahouni, first of all, is Gaddafi in any ways, in your eyes, a reformed character?
It's, David, it's actually very hard to conceive. He's a man is in power now for 40 years, and there is a history behind this man and his family. From the coup of 1969 to today, this is a man who took a very peaceful country, took a very wealthy country, and changed it to a rogue nation. He's a man who basically waged war on his own people. It's a country that doesn't have any laws. It waged war on his neighbors, and it's a country that doesn't have any constitutions. There is as I said, a whole history of not 1 or 2 years, but 40 years, and it's very, very hard to conceive that this dictator can actually reform or be reformed.
So what's going on at the moment? Is it hypocrisy from your point of view? Is the United States simply saying, let's forget about the past, we have deals here?
You know, the fact of the matter is Libya is not a priority of the United States, and in terms of the Middle East, it doesn't have that geopolitical depth. But even with that, it's actually astounding that and disappointing that the Bush administration compromised on two basic things. The first one is that the basic rights, as Joe Biden said, of the Libyan people and their aspiration for a constitutional democracy, and more important also, or equally important, the Bush administration basically is bargaining for money, for oil, and Gaddafi is one of the basic or the cases where Lockerbie proved that this is a sponsor state terrorism, killed American citizens, and the Bush administration basically now is bargaining for money for the lives of these people.
I'm going to come
back. I think
back.
That's not only hypocrisy, I think it's disappointing.
Yeah, I'll come back to you in just a moment, Dr. Tahouni, to get some of your recollections of the time of the revolution back in 1969. David Mack, you were there at the time of the revolution. You were a fairly junior diplomat at the time, but I know since then, because you've worked for the State Department, you have in the last few years gone back and tried to sort of oil a few wheels, open a few doors. What was the message you took unofficially from the United States to Libya?
I wanted to make clear to the Libyans that the United States welcomed Libya's return to the international community, provided that Libya continued to abide by the norms and laws of the international community, including basic respect for human rights. There's been a long history of difficult relations between the United States and Libya, and periods of intense violence from both governments towards citizens of the other. And there have been some periods also of productive interaction, such as Professor Tahouni was speaking about prior to the Libyan revolution in 1969. The difficulty has been that there's also been long periods when both governments have neglected their national strategic needs to have some kind of reconciliation.
But
that's what's happened. I'm
sorry to butt in, but
yes,
just to pick you up on that point, that is really what's happened here, isn't it? America sees a strategic need to have Libya within its fold to help fight terrorism in North Africa, for example, and ignores the fact that this is a dictatorship, that there is no democracy there. When America calls for other countries to be democratic, why is it not doing so with Libya and saying, yes, you can come back into the international fold when you've changed your ways?
David, you're correct in saying that for the United States, the strategic importance of Libya and the strategic contributions that Libya can make in the war against terrorism, in efforts to stem the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, for the stabilization of the African continent, Darfur, Chad, and so on, and for the stabilization of the southern Mediterranean, which has a huge problem of flows of illegal immigrants from Africa into Europe. Libya can make huge contributions here. It's been an immense advance for the strategic interests of the United States to have Libya reintegrating with the international community. The United States, unlike our partners in Europe, has not based its relations with Libya primarily on business and commercial factors. Those countries all normalized their relations over 5 years ago. They've had full diplomatic relationships with ambassadors in Tripoli. They've had full consular relationships with full visa issuance in Tripoli and sometimes in Benghazi. They've had visits at the head of state level, whereas the United States has moved very, very cautiously, and we've kept the focus on the strategic interests, even though the U.S. government recognizes that American firms were suffering discrimination vis-a-vis their competitors from Europe and other countries.
Let's examine Gaddafi, the character, now, and I'll go to Ali Tahouni in Washington State on the west coast of America, so many thousands of miles from your home and your family. I know lots of them left behind still in Tripoli. What was it like for somebody who was very much against the regime in the late 1960s and in the years that followed, somebody who voiced their disregard for what Gaddafi represented?
That was really a very easy way for the regime. As I said, the basic thing, and the ambassador would recall, the first thing that Gaddafi did is basically abolish the constitution. One of the things that we should know, and the people should know, is that Libya was a constitutional monarchy. We had a constitution, and as I said, we had a very peaceful nation that was in the beginning of building itself. So the first thing that he did, basically abolished all laws, all laws, and from that point on, from 1969, and in particular from 1973, any opposition to his regime, even by students who basically, 1975, who basically demonstrated for just an independent student union. These people in April 7th, 1977, were hanged in the public place. And from there on, there is a whole history of basically murder, disappearance. We have thousands of people in Chad, in the war of Chad, that are unaccounted for. We have the massacre of Abu Salim prison that basically Amnesty now is adopting as a major case. So we have a whole history. This is a very ruthless regime.
And you believe
and
you yourself were on a hit list, that there was an assassination squad perhaps looking for you?
Oh yeah, sure. Among many, as I said, at least there's 22 people who were shot in Europe. And so there is a whole history, as I said, that when you talk about this type of regime, and I have to disagree with the ambassador here, when you talk about normalization, and the United States actually is not interested in oil. It's true that the United States took its time for this normalization, but the bottom line, there is the Atlantic, Mr. Ambassador, the Atlantic Council report that basically identified 4 areas of the relationship between the United States and Libya. First was terrorism, second, the war, the weapons of mass destruction, third was oil, and fourth was human rights. So these 3 things, all achieved by the United States. The joke of these weapon of mass destruction, and it is a joke actually, was accomplished. The regime is basically providing all kinds of securities to the United States, information. Oil companies are back. So the question for you and the question for the United States, where is the 4th element of this relationship?
And what we'll do in just a short while is take a look at where the regime goes in the years to come, what's in it for both sides. Do stay with us, if you will, here on Inside Story.